Western Sydney doesn't wait for permission, it builds. Welcome to Westside Stories, Beyond the CBD, the podcast where I sit down with the people shaping the engine room of Sydney. I'll chat with the leaders and community builders whose stories are bigger than a job title and whose impact is felt right across the West. Each episode is a real conversation about the moments that changed everything, the risks that paid off, the mistakes that hurt, and the lessons worth stealing. I'm Johnston. Let's get into today's story. So, I'm lucky enough to be joined by Tony Nash of Booktopia fame today. Welcome, Tony.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
No, thank you for coming. I know you've done a few of these, so hopefully we can add some more value to those listening today. Why don't you tell us about the early years? And you finished school, and you didn't go to uni. You went to the school of hard knocks, so to speak.
Well, I attempted to go to uni. I got scraped into uni where I mastered in Space Invaders and snooker.
Right.
And failed in accounting and economics and dropped out and became the mail boy at the NRMA back in 1981.
1981. So you started out in the mailroom, so to speak.
Correct.
Okay. And then just tell us a little bit about your career and where it headed from there.
Sure. So after a year, I went and applied to do a computer programming certificate, not at uni, but just a programming certificate. It was a 6-month course, which I managed to drag out for a year and 3/4, which was very talented of me to do that. And I ended up getting a job as a computer programmer on Cockatoo Island when it was a shipyard. And I worked there as a COBOL programmer for about a year and a half. And I was really bad at programming. And so I wanted to make my fortune, decided to go into sales. And I got a job as a computer salesman in the mid-'80s. And I was really bad at that. So then I thought, well, I'm going to go traveling around the world for a few years. And so I did. And I ended up in London. And I got a job in recruitment for the computing industry in 1987, beginning of 88. And I worked in that for a couple of years in London, had a great time. I was very good at recruitment. And so I found my little sweet spot where I could be productive and earn good money. And so I continued to travel, returned back to Australia and got a job as a recruiter in the Computer Power Group in one of their companies. And I worked as an IT computer contracting recruiter for about, I think I was in about 5 years before I then started my own recruitment agency on the internet in the mid-'90s, when I would go out and tell people I'm an internet recruitment company and they'd go, "What's the internet?" And I had to explain the internet because it was, very early days. I started 2 years before Seek.com.au started. I was the third recruitment agency on Seek, and that company grew, and I convinced my family, my brother and my brother-in-law and my sister to join me, and we grew that company. So that took us through to about the year 2000.
Right. Okay. Well, you would have got a good deal off Seek. They charge an arm and a leg these days.
Do they?
They do.
They
do. So what did recruitment teach you? What did you love about recruitment?
I love the fact that what I was selling was completely intangible. So the person that I was representing was unique, and that my client was unique. And I liked the idea of matchmaking, of finding the right candidate for the right company. Because I had an IT background and I was recruiting IT people, I could talk comfortably with my clients as well as the candidates and not feel like I was just kind of in a position where I was going to just flog them without really understanding the deep machinations of what their career was and what the role was. So I loved that, and I was pretty competitive, and so winning and being the best recruiter or earning as much money as I could suited me, and I liked that there was no ceiling on that, so therefore it was really up to me. And there were plenty of times in those years when I was before my own. When it's your own company, you work long hours, but as a recruiter, I'd work till 10 p.m. at the office, and I'd sleep under the desk sometimes if I was really going, because back in those days, there was no, there was, the database was filing cabinets all along one wall, and you had to look and pull out resumes and go through each paper resume without doing a
Wow.
database lookup.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was very different.
So fundamentally, it was sales for you, and you were learning about sales
Hmm.
as it went on. So did you start this business with the aim of scaling it and eventually selling it? Was that the
Um, so in '93, so 3 years before I started my first company, I did or '92, I did a course called Money and You
Mhm.
with Robert Kiyosaki, the guy that wrote Rich Dad Poor Dad, for those that have come across that book. And that I did that course maybe, I don't know, 6 years before he even wrote the book. So I then went on to do one of his follow-up courses, which was the Business School for Entrepreneurs in Hawaii. It was 16 days,
Mhm.
full on. So what I learned through training with him was that when you start a company, you're building an asset. Now it's your choice if you want to sell it, if you want to step away and get a dividend from it because it's successful, right? Or you just want to keep working in it.
Mhm.
And so when you ask that question, I have to reflect on that there was no clear, like, horizon point. It was always about, how can I continue for my business to be more valuable
Yeah.
for someone to acquire it, and that would mean more revenue, more profit, more whatever that, that makes up the value of a company. So it was always about, how can I add more value, and for me, it always came back down to, how can you satisfy more customers. I was a very customer centric salesman. So that's how that all kind of rolled along. There was no guarantees back then. Also, so
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Okay, so you sold that business, and then was there another one after that?
we sold it because along the way, my brother-in-law was an IBM software engineer, and we had built this chat software to chat to our candidates while
Mm.
they're at their desk at work in a secure and encrypted way. Um, it was pretty innovative for the internet back in the late '90s, and the dot-com boom was happening. So we wanted to make our fortune in the dot-com
Right.
boom. And so we sold the recruitment company to focus on this chat software because it was applicable and was, over time, it was being used by other clients to chat also with their candidates. Problem was is that not long after we did that, the dot-com crash happened in the early 2000s, and so our business was going to go under.
Right.
And we recruitment company, then we rolled into a new internet software business. And then when the dot-com crash happened and we weren't making enough money, or we were making some money, but not enough money to cover our costs, I said, I asked a web designer, Google's been going for a few years. How do you get to the top of it?
Mm.
And so he told me what to do, and we got to the top of Google for live help and chat software, hoping that we'd make a few more sales. And it was the early 2000s, and I was talking to somebody about getting them to use our chat software, and they said, "Look, I'd love to chat to people. I just need more people coming to my website." And because I'd already got our our business to the top of Google, I said, "I can get you to the top of Google." So I did a proposal for $500
Mm.
and got them to the top of Google, and they were very happy. Then I was talking to the largest independent car rental company in New Zealand, and I was similar conversation, chat software, love to chat, but we need more people coming to our site. I can get you to the top of Google. Give me a proposal. So instead of putting one in for $500, I put one in for $18,000. And I spoke to the guy for an hour on the phone about all the things we're going to do to improve his business and transform his company. And at the end of the hour, he goes, "All right, let's do it." So I put down the phone. I looked at my family. I said, "Man, we're in big trouble here. We've got no idea what we're doing."
Right.
And so from daybreak to midnight, we just learned the art of driving traffic into websites. And we quickly morphed from a failing internet software business into a surviving and then thriving digital marketing agency. And so there were other SEO and SEM companies at that time, but they were going for the big end of town. They were going for the banks and the insurance companies. And because we were entrepreneurs, we just targeted small to medium sized enterprises, and we ended up with lots and lots of projects.
Yeah. And this will become more apparent as we get through this chat, but you do sound like someone who's an early adapter. You're talking about AI and look where it is today. You talk about some of these decisions and visions that you were able to see into the future. Do you think it was luck, or do you think that you could just see and read the market and where it was going?
There's a few threads there in terms of thinking about who's listening to this.
Mm.
One, I would say, is that it's really important to think about the landscape of business and a problem or a situation or an industry or your company three-dimensionally, meaning that you're not stuck in one position looking at it two-dimensionally. As you've got to move around, you've got to look at things in certain ways, you've got to see the opportunities. So I certainly have done that. And one of the things I did learn at that business school with Robert Kiyosaki a few years before was, or by that stage, 10 years before, was to think three-dimensionally in business. Certainly around negotiating, I remember that part of that. One of the sessions where the guy was teaching us about negotiation was, if you're going to be a negotiator, you have to think in 3D.
Mhm.
And so that's one part of it, is to look at your industry, look at AI, look at the internet, look at working from home, look at everything, and what does that really mean, and be curious. So one of my initial slide when I do my keynotes is, the quality of your life is determined by the quality of the questions that you ask. As a recruiter, as a salesperson, as a parent, as a lawyer, as a doctor, anything. Like, if you can ask better questions, you're going to start um, uncovering, unpacking, identifying opportunities. So that comes from a curious mind. So if you're curious and you're continuing to ask more and more, and you haven't kind of squared it away and say, I know everything I need to know, which we do, with whatever it is, then you're at, you have the freedom to potentially pick up on things that are coming your way. The other part of that answer is, which I didn't have a sense of that really at that time when you're talking about, but what I learned over the years in business is that you've got to be able to identify the surf, the waves that are coming through, and so I'm not a surfer, but I can imagine sitting out the back of the waves on my board, looking out at all these humps coming in from the outer ocean to to break on our beaches.
Mm.
And to me, they're just humps. But to a surfer, they can probably work out which is the one to catch.
Mhm.
Let that one go. This, 3 or 4 back, that's the one. And I just got to back it up a little. Business is the same. And you've got to be looking at those tidal shifts, those waves coming through, and be able to be in a position to ride them.
Right.
And so there's very much an element of that. And right now with AI, there is a huge, massive tsunami coming through, of which some people are going to be wiped out, and others will be able to ride that wave. As crazy and as scary as that may be, but it's going to change the landscape.
Yeah. I think there's some really good bits in there. Thanks for sharing, Tony.
Mhm.
So that business then progresses, and where do you head from there?
So not long after 2003, my brother worked on an SEO project for Angus and Robertson to get them to the top of Google. It was a successful project, and they outsourced their website and fulfillment to a company in Sydney that managed about 80 bookstores' websites. They were probably one of the biggest, but there were other big ones like Collins Bookstores and others. And my brother had this idea of approaching the owners of that company and saying, hey, we did a good job with Angus and Robertson getting them to the top of Google. You've got many other bookstore clients. Why don't you introduce us and we'll get them all to the top of Google and you make lots of money. So that meeting happened at Christmas of 2003. And we pitched the idea, and the owner of the company said, nah, not interested. I said, you're not interested in making more money? He said, look, it's not our business. We manage bookstore websites and we fulfill those orders. That's what we do. And I said, well, how does it all work? And they said, you give us the name of your bookshop, and within 10 minutes, we can have a bookstore up and running with your name up the top and 1 million books on there. And if you sell anything, we'll pay you a commission.
Mhm.
And I said, well, that sounds interesting. And he goes, yeah, but no internet-only businesses made anything out of it. It's all the traditional stores that wanted a website. I said, okay. So I went away from that meeting and I said to my brother, because we always looked for other business opportunities, I said, oh, I wouldn't mind giving that book thing a bit of a go.
Mhm.
So I was going on a camping trip that 2003 Christmas, trying to come up with the name of a bookshop, and I wasn't happy with what I was coming up with, and I was in a national park in New South Wales, and the insects were screaming at the top of their lungs, and I turned to the person I was with and I said, oh, it's like that kids movie, Insectopia. And I thought, oh, Booktopia, that'd be a good name. And of course, back in 2003, we were still on dial-up modems for those that are old enough to remember.
Yeah.
So I couldn't get on my phone and do a lookup and see if it was still available. I had to wait till I got back after a week's camping, and yes, it was available. Bought the URL and registered the business, and we approached that company and said, okay, we're going to use you guys, and it's Booktopia. And so we started with that. And my brother, who handled the finances, said, all right, you can start Booktopia. Has to be outside of hours because we've got all this SEO and SEM digital marketing work.
Yeah.
And I'm giving you a budget of $10 per day to start the company. And so that's all I had. And I set up my Google ads, and I just kept working on them from 9 p.m. till 2 a.m. every night. And after the 3 days, I had sold one book, which was the total sales for the day,
Mhm.
$2,000 in month one. But then by month 4, I was up to $30,000 a month. And by the end of the year, $100,000 a month. And by the end of 2 years, $200,000 a month. So that's, it came out of nowhere. There was no like light bulb moment
Yeah.
or here's a gap in the market. It literally was a Hansel and Gretel, one breadcrumb led to another kind of story.
So how quickly did your brother and more so yourself move into Booktopia full time?
That didn't happen. So we started actually on the same day that Facebook started, February the 4th, 2004. And we didn't let go we let go of our last digital marketing client in 2009.
Right.
So it was 5 years after. So we were still consulting, and we were pouring all the money back in 2007. So 2 years before was when we parted ways with that company that was managing the site and doing the fulfillment. We built our own website and started doing our own fulfillment. So we're turning over about 2 million a year.
Yep.
So we're doing that, and we had a little warehouse in Artarmon. We basically we had our clients that we were still consulting for, and then it grew. By the time we moved to Lane Cove West in 2009, our revenue, I think, would have been around 7 million. So we'd more than doubled twice.
So how did you cope with that growth, that quick growth from a back end perspective?
That's a great question. So we're the only company ever to make the AFR Fast 100 8 times.
Wow.
Over 15 years, we had 25% compound annual growth rate year on year. So I kind of, sometimes it felt like I was struggling or we were holding on for dear life to get that kind of growth. And other years, it was almost like we were bonsaiing it to the extent that we didn't want to grow too hard. So what I would do every month is I would look at what we did last year for the month. So let's just say we're looking at April. Right? April in the book industry is always a low month. And what was for us does sometimes coincide with Mother's Day, but we weren't very good at Mother's Day because Mother's Day is blokes going out and buying gifts for their wives and their
Right.
mums, which we do very last minute, no thought and planning and overspend. Whereas Father's Day was bigger for us, which in the book industry, it's the other way around. Mother's Day is always bigger because the women were organized and buying books for their husbands or their fathers or whatever, well in advance. And therefore, our Father's Day was always bigger. But let's just say, going back to where I was at, and that is that in April, what I would do is I would look at the previous year
Mhm.
to see what we did and go, all right, what have we got to do to be 25 to 30% more this year than last year? So I wasn't trying to go, what did we do last month and how can I be bigger? Because we had Mother's Day, Father's Day, Christmas, end of financial year sales. We had start of school. We had start of uni. So the months were more aligned. And so I was always looking at what we did the previous year and go, okay, what can I do to be 25 to 30% more? So that was one thing.
Mhm.
The other thing from a organizational team's perspective, the team got very used to it growing at a very similar rate.
Mhm.
I think if it was clunky and if we jumped by 100% one year and then we were flat for the next year and it was 60% and then 10%, and it was just really, but we had a nice cadence,
Mm.
and that was really important and interesting for me to witness. So there was always more people, there was always more sales, but it was always coming at a kind of like a steady flow that was managed reasonably well. So that's one way in answering your question, how we handled it.
Okay. So I'm interested, and this is the exciting bit for me to understand this a little bit more because you've gone from recruitment to IT, programming, AI, sort of sales
Mm.
into a business that's probably, would you call it sales and logistics?
Um, yeah, yeah.
Sales and
It was tech, sales, logistics. Yep.
So logistics is something we haven't talked about in your career yet, right? So you're
Mm.
learning on the go
Mhm.
and you're putting all these things together in your mind. I mean, did you stop and pause and think, shit, this is scary? Or did you just, like, what was your mindset about learning on the run?
I never felt scared. Um, Not at all. I was always up for the challenge. Um, it always came back to, I said the quality of your life is determined by the quality of the questions that you ask. The question that we asked every single day
Mm,
at Booktopia, and probably for me and in recruitment, was what do our customers want?
right.
And when you go searching with a curious mind for those answers, it was interesting for me because, for example, um, we were selling a lot of books with bare chested men in kilts in the Scottish Highlands on the front cover,
Yeah.
romance books that we were having to bring in from the US. Why? Because there was no Australian publisher doing that. There was a big online community of women buying these books. And the bookshop owners who are they're kind of bibliophile, they love books, they love their bookshop, wouldn't read Mills and Boon. So hand on heart, it's very hard for them to sell a romance title if they're not really emotionally connected to it. But I saw that people were buying them, so we stocked them and we brought them in anticipation that people would be buying them, not simply taking an order and then going and flying it in from overseas. So we could see that the numbers where the data was there that people were buying those books and those authors and so forth. So that comes from what do the customers want? Well, they want those books, so we stock them. The same with any of the other titles that we ended up stocking. So what do your customers want? And then it comes down to the logistics. So for me, I always looked through the organization and go, what's our weakest link?
Hmm.
So at one point it was logistics, and then we invested in more in logistics or inventory, hold more stock. And then all of a sudden it was more like maybe IT or maybe finance, our funding or capital, or maybe it was our marketing. So I was always looking at what's the weakest link in our business and working on that, which then would then push the weakest link to another area which needed work on it. And so I was kind of always working my way through the organization in that way to go, and that's how we strengthened the business. So by doing that, we grew. So it wasn't scary. It was more like that's what's ahead of us. So we've got to address that.
Yeah. So I imagine it's a team effort, right? You're growing this company. What are the qualities and traits you look for when you're bringing someone into a business like that?
So we're now into recruitment. Right.
Recruitment, culture.
Yeah. Yeah. So first of all, as a recruiter before any of the other businesses, I was always stunned when a client of mine would say, and ask them for the brief of what they're looking for.
Mm.
And it would be certain IT skills, 5 years of this, 3 years of that, 2 years of this, and so forth. And I'm going, okay, all right. And what salary are you going to pay? X. And what's in it for them? What's going to, well, no, we just want to get somebody who's really experienced in those things, and we want them to join our organization. And I'm going, well, why would they join you? Well, we'll pay them a bit more.
Mm.
And I always was more like, what can we do to have somebody move from where they currently are to where they're going to be and have it be part of their career journey? Because that's what a lot of people want. They want to go, they want to keep moving and getting more, obviously more income, but more experience, more opportunities. So I was always kind of excited about that. So when it came to recruitment, it was like, how can someone join our organization, and then through their efforts and opportunities, that because we were growing as well,
Yeah.
how can their resume be of more value? How can they be of more value, which means they're more value to themselves, to the companies that they serve, to their family, and so forth. So quite often it would be that it was about understanding the motivations and the kind of the career aspirations of the person, and then thinking about the role and whether they actually suited that. So people stayed for a long time, and probably because when you're growing, they end up getting more and more responsibilities, which is what they want, and their teams are growing underneath them, and so forth. And those that were joining at the lower end were having opportunities as well to take on more responsibility. So I think that played an important part.
And how easy was it to let go of some of those responsibilities that you would have taken hold of from the early days and entrust those with other people, department heads?
I loved letting go.
Right.
I still wanted to have my measurement. I wanted to have my digital dashboard that I could see what the hell was going on.
Yeah.
But the more that I could let go and have someone step into a senior sales director role, or marketing, or merchandising, or logistics, it's kind of, you're accumulating talent. You're getting more. The one thing that I did do though was largely like, when I knew we needed a CFO, it was like, okay, I realized we need a CFO, and I spoke to the guy who was our external fractional CFO, even though they don't use those words back then. But
Yep.
it was like a guy and he had some bookkeepers helping us. And then I realized it was about 2010, okay, we need to get someone in-house. It was like, okay, how can I afford to have a CFO? Not we need to hire a CFO or a sales director so we can get to there. It was like, what revenue and profit do we need to be on so we can afford that one? So it's like, oh, we've got to work a little harder for the next 3 months, 6 months, and then we can afford that person.
Yep.
A lot of people who don't come from a recruitment background or a sales and entrepreneurial background like me may think, right, well, I need to hire someone to help me take on that role. But it was not how I operated.
Right.
And obviously having clear job descriptions and KPIs, what are you focused on? I was also very mindful of how long it took for someone to get up to speed.
Mm.
So I felt that a new sales director should take 2 years before they would be um, kind of operating without any kind of day-to-day, not micromanagement, but just assistance. They knew enough about the industry, the
Yeah.
business, all the other divisions, how it all worked. So I was still during that period between day one and the end of 2 years would be thinking, all right, what else do they need to know? But I was very, very mindful around that too, just that it does take time for someone to spread their wings and feel like they can hold their weight
Yeah.
um, in that role.
Okay. And then if we've skipped something, stop me and let me know. But 2016 was an interesting year for the business. Tell me a bit about that.
Why don't we do 2014
Okay.
first? 2013. So in asking the question, what do our customers want? Well, I could see that we were selling more books because they were in stock rather than having to bring them in. Now there was 6 million books on our website, and we had at that time maybe 10,000 titles in stock.
Yep.
Um, and I could see that we needed to hold more inventory, and I also could see that we made more sales um, when we had that inventory, but also that the amount of time that it took to get from us to our customer was also important.
Yep.
So we were busting out of our britches in Lane Cove West. We had at that stage 2 warehouses with 2,000 square meters each,
Mm.
and I felt that we needed to get closer to the Australia Post major hub in Sydney, because then we could have later pickups faster into their system. Tracking codes are being issued, you know, more closely to when they're actually on their way.
Yeah.
And so I started looking around Western Sydney for a place, and it took a year finally to find somewhere
Right.
in Lidcombe, and which was, the suburb over from Chullora where Australia Post was. And the Christmas Eve um, of 2013, I get a call from the real estate agent to go, look, the CEO of Fujitsu has called the CEO of Goodman to say, we rent properties from all over the country,
Mm.
and we want that property. And we had already paid our $10,000 holding,
Yeah.
heads of agreement, right? It's yours. You got it.
Mhm.
And the real estate agent goes, Tony, I've got the worst possible news. That this is what's happened. And I'm so, so sorry, because we had spent a year trying to find something.
Mm.
It was about 7,500 square meters. And so I said to the guy, Sean, relax. Yeah, his name was Sean as well.
Yeah.
Um, Sean, it's okay. A better opportunity is waiting around the corner. Now, I could have kicked and screamed and yelled and did whatever, but what happened was, because I was amenable to allowing them to take care of a large corporate client,
Mm.
they bent over backwards to find something for us. And we ended up getting 10,000 square meters instead of 7.5 at the same price a couple of months later for what we would have got the 7.5 for.
Right.
So there's the big lesson in there is thinking about when something comes out of left field and scuppers you, is like, how are you going to um, say, bring it on, all right, and keep your head level and your emotional state going, okay, well, it wasn't what I was expecting, but let's see where this takes us.
Yeah.
And that's a really, really important lesson. So that ended up being mid 2014 was when we moved to our Western Sydney operations.
Mhm.
Our revenue was about 40 million. When I left the company in 2022, when we were still in that, well, we actually added another unit, so we were in 14,000 square meters in all joining. The revenue was 240 million. So we'd gone from 40 million over 8 years to 240 million with me as the CEO.
Wow.
That's when I stepped away. So 2016, which is what you were referring to, So 2016, there was a bit of a .com or e-commerce boom, and Kogan, Surf Stitch, Temple and Webster, Redbubble had all listed, and we were turning over 80 million, and we thought let's list.
Okay.
And we spent a good year working on it and working with the lawyers and working with the accountants and getting ready. And then after about, I don't know, 9 months of working on that, Amazon announced they were coming to Australia, and we were about 4 weeks away from doing the management roadshows to get the money in, etc. And all of them said, "Well, Amazon's going to annihilate you, so we're not going to invest." And that was 2016, and so we had to basically stop everything. And we had spent $1 million with the lawyers and $1 million with the accountants, which you would normally get back when you do a capital raise to list.
Yeah.
So we had to pay for that ourselves, which was painful in 2017. And then we had to keep powering on, and we tried to actually sell the business in 2017. We had representative take us around the world to see if they could find a buyer. No one wanted to buy. Books are dead. Amazon's going to annihilate you. So we just had to keep growing. So we kept growing. We cracked through 100 million in revenue, and then in 2020 we did our first capital raise. Our revenue was about 150 mil, and we did an $8 million raise, private, through a consortium of investors led by one guy. And then 6 weeks after that, the pandemic hit. And so you've never seen an investor's face go so white, going, "What the hell have I done with my money?"
Yeah.
And my investors' money. And but of course, for online retail, it was an absolute boon, which he didn't know, we didn't know, and we were up 60 to 70% year on year, and we had turned off all of our marketing and stopped sending out emails because we were just trying to hang on for dear life to process the orders that we were getting.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
That's amazing.
and then in about I think it was about July, August of that year of 2020, I said to my chairman, who had joined us in 2016 when we tried to list, and we kept him on for those years. And I said, maybe we should have another crack at an IPO. And the other investor said, I think we should as well, who had just come on board in the last 6 months. And we did an 11-week IPO. So instead of fuffing around for 9 months, we just smashed it. Yeah.
Okay.
And there's a lot to do with understanding the wave and riding the wave and missing the wave. For those of us that have ever, I know Western Sydney, we don't have as many waves as we do on the eastern suburbs. But for those that have been down to the beach, and the idea of, I'm not a surfer, as I said, but I like body surfing and boogie board surfing with the kids, and the idea of being on a wave and seeing the wave that you just missed going towards the beach, and you have missed it, and everyone else is on the wave, and you're kind of turning around to see when the next wave is coming so you can catch that. That feeling of missing the wave was how I visually remembered 2016. And in 2020, during the pandemic, there was no way we were going to miss that wave.
Yeah.
And so we really did everything super, super quick.
Right.
And we got that done.
Got it done. Just we'll come back to this, but Amazon, what did you have to pivot at all, or what did you do to not just remain relevant but grow with them coming into the market here?
Yeah, it's a great question. So a few, maybe, I don't know, 2014, 2015 probably. It was quite a few years before. I decided to do some research, both in my travels as well as online, to go, what is it about companies that are thriving where in North America and Europe, where Amazon is already in a mature state, because they hadn't come to Australia yet. And everywhere I looked, it's because they focused on one thing and did it really well. And when you've got your phone, and the phone, 10, 11 years ago was not as important and as easy to use as it is today, but when you the screen that you have to connect with the customer and you're showing what you've got to sell, it's harder when you're everything to everyone than it is if you're just one vertical to one customer
Right.
base. So I I felt that that being in books was going to be okay. We're also Australian, and Australians are fairly parochial,
Mm.
and so a lot of them don't like Amazon and won't shop with Amazon. So I knew that was also there, but um, yeah, I just felt that we could do a good job with that. The other thing that, because I got asked the question all the time, forget about even Amazon, what about your competitors? Because there's Dimix,
Yeah.
there's, this one and that one. And it was like, I can only relate it to this, that when I was much younger, 40 years ago, I was a decathlete. I
Mm.
competed in the 10 events across 2 days. And when you're a decathlete, it's basically you're not good at any of the events, but you're okay at all of the events, some better than others. And my best event was 100 meters where I ran 11 flat.
Mhm.
Now, as a decathlete, that's very good. It's also the first event. So at the beginning of the decathlon, my name would be near the top.
Right.
Right. And then as the events went on, I always fell over in the hurdles. Um, is that you'd work your way back down. I'd work my way back down the list of rankings. But my sprinting coach would say to me, if you want to go fast, you pick a point down the runway and you focus on that. Right. If you want to slow down, just look to the left and look to the right to see where everyone else is, and you'll slow down. But build peripheral vision
Yeah.
if you want to know where they are. So there's a lot about Booktopia's growth. See, when we were at 5 million in revenue, there are others at 5 million in revenue.
Mm.
But when we were at 20 million, there was still others at 5 million. When we were at 50, maybe there was someone else at 10. When we were at 100, there was maybe someone else at 10. So there's a lot about not focusing on what the others are doing, focusing on the customer
Mm.
and just picking a point down in the horizon where you're going and getting there as fast as you can. That um, so linking that back into the Amazon considerations as well as everybody else and what you're doing, I think we grew faster because of those things than trying to keep an eye out on what the hell everyone else is doing. So yeah, it was a blend of those concepts.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting, the link that you've got with a sporting mindset that you bring into business. Um, I think there was another analogy that I've seen you say about where would you prefer to play? Would you rather be on the field, or run us through that analogy?
Yeah, sure. That's mostly to do when something comes out of left field.
Yeah.
So, we got fined by the ACCC for $6 million on some wording that was on our website that was wrong. That 19 customers during the pandemic were treated incorrectly, and our team quickly remedied all of those very, very quickly.
Yep.
And um, and the ACCC fined us $6 million for that. And um, the proportion to what happened was completely ridiculous. But you've you've got to you're in business. So for me, it's always been okay when it comes to the state of origin or the AFL grand final, whatever sport you're in. Where would you prefer to be?
Hmm.
You want to be on the field playing the game, where someone might come out of, you can't even see them, they come and smash you in the ribs, right? Which is painful and hurts and maybe even break a rib,
Hmm.
right? Would you prefer to be on the sideline with the support team in the crowd yelling at the ref and cheering on your team? Do you want to be the ref? Do you want to be a journalist writing about the game? Do you want to be at home screaming at the TV or at the pub screaming at the TV for your team? And for me, it was always, I'd prefer to be on the field. And a lot of entrepreneurs that they really relate to that and that makes sense to them. The main thing for me about all of that, though, is that when something comes out of left field and you didn't expect it, you got to say, bring it on. Because if you want all the accolades, listing on the ASX or AFR Fast 108 times or winning Telstra Business of the Year or even we were Western Sydney Business of the Year, it's like if you want all those accolades, then you're also going to have to take the fines. You're going to have to take people resigning. You're
Yeah.
going to have to take all the things that come at you. But if all you want to do is celebrate the wins and not also embrace the things that not losses, but some of the obstacles that are thrown at you, then don't go into business. Don't do it just because you want all of the glory. You're going to have to deal with those big heavy blows by some big footy player that's 140 kilos is going to knock you for 6, right?
Yeah.
That's being in business.
Well, just a quick one. This is why I love these conversations. Western Sydney is full of people doing big things quietly, and the lessons are practical. If this episode resonates, follow the show and share it with one person who'll get value back from it. Back to it. Yeah. Well, there's some good tips there, Tony. So let's come back to Booktopia. So you list, and then you continue to grow, and where do we head from there?
So first of all, the capital raise in January that we did was at a valuation of 80 mil.
Mm-hmm.
11 months later when we listed, it was 315 mil. So it was quite a big thing. But for me, people asked me when we listed, "Oh, you must be so proud, and what a great achievement." And I would say to them, "Look, it's like being in the Tour de France, 21 stages over 3 weeks, and it's like being on the 10th stage. The IPO was like being on the 10th stage and going through the 40-kilometer to go banner, and the finish line of that stage is at the top of a mountain, and you still got 11 more stages to go."
Right.
So I never felt like it was, lots of bottles of champagne and let's party. It was like, we've got a job to do. There's more customers, there's shareholders, there's all these other responsibilities. So I didn't, I was very grounded around that. Booktopia continued to grow. So we got up to the 240 mil, as I said, but a year after we listed, I said to my chairman, I said, "Look, I'm Christopher Columbus. I'm not the King of Spain. Don't ask me to run the country. I want to expand the empire because my talent is more in sales and marketing and growth and identifying the opportunities." And it took about 5 months to get him to agree. And we announced to the market that I was going to step down as the CEO, blah, blah, blah. But because we were listed, we have independent directors, non-executive directors, as you do when you have listed companies, because there's shareholders and there's other responsibilities and governance required. Now, quite often, because they're non-executive directors, many of them are, not to say that these were necessarily, but quite often they're very institutionalized. So why did you choose IBM? Well, they're the biggest and the best. You can't blame me. Why did you choose Deloitte? Well, they're biggest and the best. You can't blame me. So to replace me, they engaged a recruitment agency called Egon Zehnder, which is a global recruitment company. And it was a $500,000 base salary, plus super, plus incentives. And the fee was $350,000. So 70% of the base salary. And I had been in recruitment, and I said to the board, "That's ridiculous. Why are you wasting our money on spending, like, it's just so irresponsible." But they were thinking they were responsible because you'll get the best if you go with the biggest, right? And so when I got on the call with Egon Zehnder, the recruitment agency, I said to them, "I want to punch you guys in the face. It's extortionate what you charge," like having been a recruiter, right?
Yeah.
And we then spoke for an hour about the role and what I was looking for as a replacement for me, etc. And then they got off the video call and went straight to the chairman and said, "You can't have a founder in a business when there's a new CEO coming in." So within a couple of weeks, they had fired me.
Right.
And so I was put on gardening leave and exited from the business, cut off from all systems except my inbox.
Yep.
And then my wife and I, we could have basically walked away from it and said, "Well, it is what it is." But it just didn't feel right to have that group of directors in control of the company. It just didn't feel, with those kind of decisions, it was the right thing to do.
Yeah.
So we called an extraordinary extraordinary general meeting to remove the chairman and one of the directors, not all directors. They didn't leave, and it took about 2 months for them to finally get a call from a couple of the external shareholders to say, we we're not voting for you. Checkmate. So
Yeah.
basically, they were gone. So one of the directors left straight away. The other one and the others all resigned. So I had all my directors resign, and they stayed on for 2 months until we could find replacements, have the annual general meeting, and then swap out the boards. We got a new board. We did recruit a CEO through that company because the previous directors had already paid half of the recruitment fee, so there was no point starting again.
Yeah.
It's going to be the same amount if I did that. But we ended up with a guy Australian guy who had been at Amazon for 14 years. And I said I was part of the recruitment process, and I was part of making sure that he was appointed. But after 2 months, I said to the new board, I said, he's not the right guy. Why isn't he the right guy? Well, I sat him in a room and I said, what do you want to know? I built the business from nothing to $250 million.
Mm.
What do you want to know how it all works? Never asked me one question about anything. So he didn't want to know what I knew. He just wanted to talk to the rest of the business and discard anything that I had done before. He wanted to start with a clean slate. And I said, I don't think that he's the right guy. But I said, well, there's nothing we can do because we've already appointed him and the market knows who he is. And I said, well, let's go then.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't in the company. I was on the board, which means that I didn't return to the business. After 2022, I didn't return to the business, other than a few little stints to help them out. But it took a year, and this guy and the executives basically ran the business into the ground, and it went to administration a year later.
It's such a shame. How did that make you feel personally, Tony? You put your career into this business, and then to have it finish like that.
It obviously, look, it was frustrating, in particular because my wife and I had loaned back some money, as did my brother-in-law and my sister, and so we had lost that. We also had a lot of shares still in the company, and we lost that. But that's what happens when you list.
Mm.
You gotta understand you're letting go.
Yeah.
It's not. Yeah, I did what I did under my guidance and leadership and understanding of customers and so forth, and I'm pretty sure that nobody else could have done what we did.
Yeah.
Nobody else in the rest of the world, actually. There was no other in the English speaking world. There was no other online bookstore that was an alternative to Amazon. We were the only country that actually accomplished that.
Yeah.
So when I got fired, which was in 2022, and this happened in 2024, and it hit the media after my lawyers and Booktopia's lawyers agreed on how it was going to exit, which took a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
It hit the media, and my phone and my email and my LinkedIn message, like, it was just SMS. It was going off the hook, right? I was just getting so many people contacting me because they thought, it's your baby, and they were worried about me.
Yeah.
And I thought I better post something. So I put a post up on LinkedIn going in capital letters, "Are you okay?" ? I am okay. And I just said, this happened. So this is not about the business going to administration. This is about me being fired. And when we listed on the ASX, I posted my post on LinkedIn, and I got 45,000 views. This one about me being fired, because I said, look, it's my choice to be better from this than be bitter.
Yeah.
And that post had 170,000 views, and it was all around mental health and well-being and so forth, that people were responding and messaging. And so similarly, when the company goes into administration, it's like, okay, well, we let go, right? You've basically said, when I'm not running the company, and you're listing. So you're giving over to, like, one of the things that happened is that um, we did another capital raise after we flipped the board into the new board. We did another capital raise. We raised about 8 or 9 million, I think, something like that. And one of the funds said to the chairman, my new chairman, he said, "I'll put 2 million into the raise as long as Tony Nash is not in the company."
Right.
So it's like, well, you've had nothing to do with the company. You've got no idea about what I did, but you're all the way extended all the way out there. What is it that you think or know that is in the best interest of the company if I'm not involved?
Yeah.
And it's just ridiculous. So you're letting go.
Yep.
And so when you IPO, you for those that do it, you've got to make sure that you've got yourself in a good financial position, regardless that the that the controls that you had are no longer there. Sometimes they are. I've seen listed companies where they are, but um, the um, the owner will have a very, very large percentage, and everyone is basically kind of has to toe the line. But um, you're letting go,
Yeah.
and so it was um, maybe because I was older, that I didn't take it as hard, but um, it's still it sucks, but it's not how we planned it. But
Yeah.
it, there's also all
Way it turned out.
the positives that came of it. There was other, if I think about, there was other businesses over the years that when we were growing, they like the first one that we used to get going, they dropped away and closed down, and so that's part of business.
Yeah. Would you say one of your superpowers is having a positive mindset?
Having a mindset, um, positive. So you've gone straight to the way that I think. Having an entrepreneurial mindset to me is different than positive. Positive to me sounds a bit like, the glass is half full, the glass is um, half empty. To me, the glass is full. The glass is full. There is no glass
Right.
half on half. So the mindset and having certain nuggets of experience and wisdom and kind of your default thinking that you pick up along the way. So obviously, like one of my mates that I went to high school with, he goes, "How the hell did Tony from I remember in high school end up being you?"
Mm.
It's because I I had life experiences. You talked about the life of hard knocks, but
Yep.
also the soft knocks and the
Yep.
lights. The signage along the way, going, you're heading in the right direction.
Mm.
So all those things, to then you know be in a position to have learnt from them. So I'm quite often processing and thinking about what happened and going, okay, what went on there, and how can I do that differently? Or
Mm.
I didn't know that. Well, that was I like I have ADHD.
Yeah.
I didn't know that I have ADHD until several years ago when my son got diagnosed.
Mhm.
Why did he get diagnosed? Is because his stepmom, my wife, said, "I think there's something going on with your son,
Mm.
our son," and she thinks it's ADHD. Goes and gets diagnosed, goes on the meds, and went from me being called up to the high school every month because some kid or some teacher's gone out of the room crying
Mm.
and getting B's, to never hearing from the school again and him getting A's.
Right.
And it was quite transformational. And so about 3 months later, my wife said to me, "I reckon you've got it as well."
Right.
So I make my appointment with a psychiatrist. He and I spend an hour together. I talk about Booktopia and
Mm.
my travels and sport and everything that I've done. And he goes, "No, I don't think you've got it." He goes, "But maybe could your wife come in?" So a week later, we go in again, and we're sitting there, and he's asking her questions. And after 20 minutes, he looks at me and he goes, "Yeah, definitely have ADHD."
Right.
And and so what I learnt is that um, is that with ADHD, you love doing what you want to do, but you hate doing the things you don't want to do.
Yeah.
And when I got diagnosed and I went on my meds, it was like the meds didn't take away all that entrepreneurial mindset, all that creativity and thinking. It just clipped the bottom of that aggravated, I don't want to do what I don't want to do, those things, my wife nagging, to going, oh, I got to get that stuff done. So it was really helpful for me to not go to that agitated, aggravated state when I was having to do certain things that I'd either historically had put off, procrastinated, whatever, and I got them done, or I gave them to someone else to get done.
Yeah.
But so that was important when you talk about the mindset. First of all, you got to understand your own operating system. So for me, that was how I thought about the world, and it came with ADHD. Not everyone has that, but for me, I did. But from um, an experience perspective, I like, because of the ADHD, I like to break up words and I like to understand the etymology of words. So, for example, you take the word intuition. People say intuition, right? If you break up the word intuition in tuition, well, that's the money that we pay to go and do a workshop or a course or something. It's your tuition, right?
Yes.
Go to school. So intuition. Oh, so it's all the experiences that you've had, which you may have been spending $1 million with lawyers, or spending money with that recruiter, or hiring that person, or going out with those people, or doing business with that company, or buying a company and it failing, or whatever it is that you do, and you put that in your gut.
Yep.
So if you aren't processing that, if you aren't coming to terms with what happened and learning the lessons, it may not end up in your gut. It may just end up in your, pissed off, fiery, like, those, I don't want to swear, but, those idiots. Like, so if you haven't been able to come to terms with it, then all the information from that experience won't be available to you, and you probably will keep repeating it. And if we think about some of our friends or whoever have had boyfriends, girlfriends, husbands, wives, where it's just seems to be the same thing playing over and over again, it's because we haven't stopped to think about what were the lessons that we needed to learn here.
Yeah.
And so I remember when I was much younger, I wrote a lot in my journals. I don't do that as much these days. So intuition, or from an etymological perspective, if I meet a psychologist, I'll ask them this one. I said, so can you tell me what the origin, the etymology, the origin of the word anxiety is? And quite often they won't know.
Right.
When I looked it up, I remember looking at Google going, I can't believe in even what I'm reading. Anxiety? The etymology of the word anxiety is to choke.
Right.
So when someone says just breathe, it's like, oh, so we heard a lot through the pandemic about anxiety levels and people anxious and all this anxiety. It's like, if you're not breathing into it, if you're not taking in oxygen with whatever you're dealing with, right, then you are stifling and you're living in an anxious state.
Yeah.
So breathing. So all these things, when you ask that question, it's, I talked about thinking in 3D and living in 3D. For those that remember those magic eye, do you ever remember, like, you have to stare at the things and make your eyes blurring, right? And then all of a sudden it goes from a 2-dimensional and then you see a dragon, right? It's a bit like that for me in these things where you're going, what is 2-dimensional, and then what is really here 3-dimensionally that I can make use of it, because that's where the reality sits.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing, Tony. I know that's a very personal journey that you've been on, and I'm sure there's others out there that will learn from that too. Just close off the Booktopia piece, and this might be. It's always easy to ask these questions and think about things in hindsight, but what are the top 2 lessons that you've learnt from Booktopia that you could share with the listeners today?
I think, first of all, um, so the word succession, there's a series Succession, and
Mm.
it's loosely based on Rupert Murdoch and
Yep.
the Murdoch family. And I've watched it recently. Um, when the chairman ousted me from the company,
Mm.
which is the board and the chairman's, well, the board's right to do.
Mhm.
In fact, I was told a stat in the last couple of months. So it's now 2 years later. Had I known this, I may have acted differently. But um, the tenure of a CEO on an ASX company is less than 3 years. Mostly they get fired,
Yeah.
and so it's like, well, that's quite a heavy statistic. So succession. So when they ousted me, there was no succession planning. There was no like, okay, well, we're going to remove the guy that built the company, the keystone block
Yep.
of the business. So what are we doing to make sure that there's a smooth handover? And I talked about being an athlete and a sprinter. So when you're a decathlete, you're never in the top three sprinters to run the 100, but quite often you'll be in a team where you're the fourth. And I quite often ran the relay.
Mm.
And when you're the fourth fastest relay runner, you're generally running the third leg.
Mhm.
That's how it played out with me, sometimes first. But the reason why that is that you can potentially only run 80 or 90 meters with the baton, while the faster runners are running a bit longer because of that time to change.
Yeah.
But when you take off at full speed and you have to pick up the baton and then run the curve and then hand over to the next runner to take it down the home straight, you your timing and that idea of being at the same speed and handing over is something that mentally and visually is is really about succession planning. So if you're just cutting someone from a business and not thinking about and planning who's going to take over and how that's going to be, it can be really um, chaotic and traumatic for the rest of the business.
Yeah.
Um, and it's interesting for me, as I like to play around with words and think about words, that the word success resides and sits within the word succession.
Mhm.
And so if you want to have future success, then you better think about who's going to take over. And some of like Andy Jassy, who took over Amazon, 25 years at Amazon, it was very well planned. And some of the other Microsoft and Google and all these other big companies,
Yeah.
long-term succession planning, long-term thinking, Microsoft, all those companies, long-term planning. And so that was one of the big things. So even for smaller roles and other, it's like, well, how's this is going to transition over, and how chaotic is it going to be? So that's definitely one lesson that I learned. The other, in terms of Booktopia, is like when it's about getting money off the table when you can,
Right.
um, and and which we did, but not to the extent that potentially we could have. So the whole process of doing an IPO and listing, and then what you think it might be, like I've learned a lot around how you, as a founder and a business owner, can maximize your your returns, and and the lessons that I learned through that, I think, has been pretty important. But it's like, to come up with the top two
Yeah.
is tough. I think one of the things with AI coming through these days, because I've got a few projects on the go, is that things are changing, and so it's it's um it's about it's about thinking about the problem and about what the opportunity is, and also with AI, what's real, like what is real.
Yeah.
What is it really going to make a difference to recruitment? Will there be no recruitment agencies? Will there be no salespeople? Will there be no this or that? It's like, well, we really don't know,
Mm.
but there's still massive opportunity in there,
Yeah.
as well. It's good.
So let's continue on that just for a little bit.
Mm.
So What's the future look like? If you're an entrepreneur thinking into the future, where should people be thinking about spending their time to improve business, to start businesses?
I mean, I'm advising other entrepreneurs at the moment.
Yep.
So, and AI is definitely one of the things as an advisor to other CEOs and founders and businesses that they are not necessarily um, savvy or technical enough to really understand what the impact's going to be. For me, it's about understanding the costs right now and what can we put in place that will potentially either reduce the overhead, not necessarily getting rid of people. I'm not thinking about that at all. It's actually what could we do to the way. Okay, so the way that I quite often thought about it, if someone's a manager and let's just say they're for argument's sake $100 an hour person,
Yep.
or $200,000 a year person, you wouldn't want them doing a 50,000 or a 70 or 80 or even $120,000 person's job.
Mm.
Like that's that's costing you, and it's also probably boring for them. So first of all, it's that idea of going, okay, what can be done 24/7 by some AI agent that is on top of inbound inquiries or answering emails, sorting out customer orders that maybe there was something they wanted to change in their order, all these things that can go on now that before would have needed for someone to log in on a Monday morning after a weekend, that they can go through all the customer contacts. All that stuff now can be automated.
Yeah.
So so for me, it's like, okay, let's look at what are all the processes that can be automated through an AI agent. And then there's also then on top of that, then okay, let's rethink. Let's just start with a blank canvas for a second and go, okay, this is what we're doing. This we're doing e-commerce, we're selling this. Is there any other way that this could be done? Or in Booktopia's case, it would have been in the old days, like we really wanted to do that. But to do that would have been 10 people, 10 programmers over 2 years to try and build something like that. We're never going to do it. Now it can literally be 2 people over 10 weeks and you could have the same system.
Yeah.
So what is that's been sitting there on the nice to have list that's been parked that could potentially be incredible value to your end customer that could help you scale?
Yeah.
That's another thing. Depending on the size of the company, and I'm not sure the listener base that's going to be listening to this podcast,
Yeah.
but I've heard something which really resonated with me in the last 6 months, and that was don't try and replace your people with AI. Try and build a second version of your organization using AI,
Mhm.
and see if you can what you can do to actually automate as much as you can without trying to get rid of people or replace people, replace those roles or parts of roles that they're doing. That really made me think, oh, well, we could literally start, just you guys keep doing what you're doing, but I'm going to start with a blank canvas here because I'm an entrepreneur and I'm a business owner and I want to see what can we do without having all those legacy systems and people
Yeah.
doing what they did. That's another area. But um, it's like there's so much change going on. It's really exciting. As an entrepreneur, it's really
Yeah.
exciting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
So tell us what you're up to these days, Tony. You mentioned your consulting and
Yeah, so I've got clients that I help. Um, I came up with a term the other day, which I thought was brilliant and my own, but when I did a search on the internet, it's like, no, there's heaps of people saying that. So it wasn't that original, but I was obviously reconfirming that I was on the right line, and it's called a fractional founder.
Mhm.
And and the difference between being an advisor and a founder, um, one of the reasons why clients engage me, they've said, is because you've done it.
Yep.
There's lots of business coaches and other people out there where they've got a $2 million business, or they did that or did this, no one did what I did, which is basically build an iconic Australian brand off a $10 a day budget to $250 million in revenue, listing on the ASX. I've done it a lot,
Mm.
and that's that's what is the greatest pleasure in terms of working commercially with my clients is that I can add this value, that leveraging the experience that I have to make sure that they don't waste money, don't waste time, and just stay on course.
Yeah.
Um, so so today, yeah, I do advisory work. I do speaking. I'm part of an organization that has called Mentor List, that has CEOs and C-suite executives as their members, and they have guest speakers, and I chair one of those groups, and I do that. Um, and so it's we've invested in a few startups, which is interesting and fun. Um, Sometimes you lose all your money,
Yeah.
and others still going from strength to strength, and you just keep supporting them. But yeah, these days it's I'm mostly interested in working with entrepreneurs who are trying to do what I did
Yeah.
with Booktopia.
Yeah. Well, if anyone's looking for some sound advice, I'm sure they can reach out to you directly.
Yeah, I've got a website, tonynash.com.au, or via LinkedIn.
LinkedIn.
Yeah, either way they can use that. Yeah.
Very good. Now, a couple of quick questions to finish with.
Mhm.
Do you remember the first book you sold at Booktopia?
No, because the company that we used to start Booktopia, didn't keep any of that.
Right.
And so when we started on $10 a day, we had no idea. It was, as I said, a Hansel and Gretel, follow one breadcrumb after another. We didn't know what we were onto until we were
Yep.
down there. So that information wasn't captured. When we left them after 3 years, and went on our own, because therefore we kept the database. It was our own database. Um, I think the book was something like Handling Infidelity,
Oh, really? Okay.
which, um, which is, yeah, you can laugh about, but that was quite an interesting, like, the idea that people relied on Booktopia to get those hard to get books,
Mm.
and that they could kind of rely on, if I'm sure the person was like a professional, like that's what they were consulting for. That was part of their work
Yeah.
as a therapist. But um, that was a great thing about Booktopia, that we could really go well beyond a bookshop, and what we of course had all the big books that bookshops had, but
Yeah.
we went really deep and long.
Yeah.
Good question.
Okay. Now, you're very learned, as I've learnt, and you do read a lot. What's the best book that you'd recommend someone to read for business?
Well, because of the ADHD, I am not a big reader.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm I listen to books more.
Okay.
So the audio book is great. From a business perspective, or from a, a private personal read,
For business.
business? I can't go past Brené Brown.
Mhm.
She's amazing as a leader. Like she's a great author, but she's the kind of um, she's the kind of business. What would you call it? She's a professor, but she teaches leadership.
Yeah.
Her thing is about calling you on it, to go, you better stomp up and be, gonna have to be bold and be brave, and so for a leader who's looking for, not necessarily a recipe of, like, oh, if I did this, then I can have a great meeting, or this is how you do a great strategy document.
Yep.
And quite frankly, with AI today,
Yeah.
you can do so much these days that you don't need that. But for someone who's really going to call you on it and go, you're going to have to be the best you want to succeed, then I'm gonna throw down some things that are going to challenge your thinking, and maybe change the way that you operate in your world.
Mhm.
Brené Brown, she's amazing.
Okay. All right. Who's a leader that you admire and why?
Um, I mean, obviously the Steve Jobs, the some people like that who could see things that others couldn't see.
Yeah.
The word entrepreneur comes from the French to enter and take. So for me, being entrepreneurial is like hacking into the universal database of everything that already exists and going and making it my own and manifesting it because you made that visible. Um, it Steve Jobs is like that. There's so many leaders like that that have literally seen things that others can't see and made them what they are.
Yeah.
Um, so so I don't think it's almost like a collage of various. This person might have said that, or that was
Yeah.
a good. I mean, for me, the big books that really inspire me are more like um, The Alchemist or Jonathan Livingston Seagull, which you can read in an hour,
Mm.
right? Or Illusions or Khalil Gibran's The Prophet. Like, I'm there's I'm more, or even from business books like The 1 Minute Manager or Who Moved My Cheese.
Yep.
I I like those little vignettes of a story that I can go, oh yeah, that really changes my thinking. Yeah, that makes more sense to me. I'm now going to show up to a meeting in a very different way than perhaps I did, or I'm going to negotiate or go to a podcast and talk in a certain way, whatever it might be.
Yep.
I think I don't I don't really think of leaders in that
Okay.
way. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Final question for me. What's the best career advice you've ever been given?
Um. Hmm. It's a funny one. It's an odd one. I'll share this story.
Mhm.
So when I was a recruiter, I was working for a company. We were going from the first floor of a cruddy old building to a few buildings down the street to the 27th floor, views all around Sydney.
Mhm.
And I was the best salesman of that company,
Mhm.
of the best recruiter. And we got taken up to look at the new offices. And you could say there were some with views of Sydney Harbour, others views out to the west, right? And my office that I was given looked straight onto the Park Regis where I could see people getting changed in the morning.
Mhm.
And I was the best salesman in the company. And so I walk out of that office onto the streets of Sydney, stomping around for 3 hours, absolutely pissed and angry.
Mhm.
Like, how could they do that? Like, I'm the best salesman in the company, blah, blah, blah. So I walk back and I go to my boss and I said, can you come into my office? And we shut the door. And I look at him and I just burst into tears. And I just saying, that I'm the best salesman in the company and this is such a crappy office and blah, blah. And for 10 minutes, I just downloaded everything. I said everything that I needed to say. And I was just literally, just giving him, just laying it all out there.
Yeah.
And he didn't say anything. He listened to everything. And I got to the end and it was just snot everywhere. And, I was really emotionally exhausted. And he looked at me and said, Tony, I understand that you're upset. He said, but this is your office and this is where you'll be. And he turned around, walked out of the door and closed the door. And I was left in the room on my own.
Mm.
And I remember standing there in this wash of emotion thinking of the movie Ghostbusters.
Mhm.
And you remember in Ghostbusters, Sigourney Weaver was in this apartment, which ended up being like a vortex to the
Yeah.
underworld. And I reframe it and I go, this is the money center of the building. They wish they had this office. This, from a feng shui building perspective, like this is like where it's at. This is the room.
Yeah.
And I had to quickly reframe it. Now, you asked the question, what was the best advice that you had? that's not advice from my boss, but the way that he was able to listen to me and then allow me to grieve, I use that a lot, I think, over the years when I allowed people to share what was going on for them. So then it was out of their system, because if it festers and it's stuck inside, it just eats away and it's never going to serve you. So I learned a lot about speaking up and saying so I could grieve whatever happened and I could actually move on. So that idea of grieving was really important. If I could close on this in terms of advice, and it didn't come from business, but I did a lot of personal development, like when I talk about Money and You and Robert Kiyosaki and all those courses, and I did other ones to really work on myself, because I could see that was what was limiting me to being successful. And I tried many different things, and I ended up doing this spiritual mastery workshop over 10 weeks. And it was in the 90s, something like that. And the guy who was running it was a Greek, he was an Australian Greek guy who had gone to India to study to be a Swami for 14 years.
Right.
And while he was over there, they were running this weekend workshop from Friday morning to Sunday, 3-day workshop, and 800 people were coming to attend this workshop. And it was about an hour before the thing was going to start, and word got through that the Swami, his Swami that was running the workshops, Swami, the great Swami, had died. And so, oh my God, 800 people are arriving. What terrible news. The Swami who was running it got up from where we were sitting, went to his room and shut the door. And everyone's going, what are we going to do? The Swamis, the Swamis, like, all these people are arriving. It's, what terrible news, the great Swami. Anyway, 15 minutes later, the Swami came out of his room completely grieved. And he had learnt and mastered the art of grieving. And to me, that was the best business advice that I had, in terms of when things don't work out the way that you wanted, you've got to process that, let it go, so you can then embrace what's next. Otherwise, you're going to continue to drag around whatever didn't happen. And I practiced it. Whenever there was something like that, we didn't get the warehouse and Fujitsu got the warehouse, it's like allowing that. That's one of the biggest things that you can do in business, is to be able to grieve what didn't work out the way Booktopia went into administration. If you can learn how to do that without resistance, it's a superpower.
Yeah. Well, with all that, thank you for joining us today, Tony. And I'm sure there's lots of takeaways that people will really enjoy from today's podcast. So thanks for joining us.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
Brilliant. That's it for today's episode of Westside Stories Beyond the CBD. If you enjoyed it, follow the show and leave a quick rating or review. It always helps more people find the stories. And if there's someone in Western Sydney whose story you think deserves a microphone, send me a message. I'm Sean Johnston. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode.